So I would like to start the new year with a basic ambient generative patch from scratch, which will be very much beginner friendly, using many basic concepts and techniques. As you can see, I will start this completely from scratch. All I have here is the audio module, and I will use also color coding with the help of the cable color key module. And let's start with the random sequence. So for this, we will use the VCV R&D module. It will look like this, right? If I send this to the scope, for example, you will see that it will generate a random value each time it's being triggered, right? In this case, I'm just using the button here to trigger it, but we get basically random values. Right now, I would like to use this for pitch, so I can change its range to, in the right-click menu, negative, positive 1 volt. Right, if we have volt per octave, right, each volt is an octave, we will have basically 2 octaves all in all. Right now, I would like to stay also in a musical scale, so I will use the VCV quantizer, right? I have already these notes selected. They work quite nicely in the context of generative patches. So the random module will go to the quantizer. I'm using yellow cables for pitch. And let's build a simple voice for now with the VCV VCO and the VCV VCA. With the VCA, we can control amplitude or volume of signals, right? And we will start with a sine wave. The sine wave will go to the VCA and then to the output, right? And then the pitch from the quantizer will go to the VCO. And again, each time I trigger it, we get a different note that will stay in the limits of the quantizer of the notes that I have selected. Now for this, let's use an LFO, right? This is also an oscillator, but it will oscillate at lower rates, at lower frequencies. So we can use, for example, the square output to trigger the R&D module for us. Right, we can also use the LFO to control the amplitude of the VCO, again through the VCA. Right, if I send a triangle wave to the VCA input, CV input, right, you can see that and you can hear this also, basically the VCA will open just to the middle point here, about 50%. If we look at the triangle wave here on the scope, right, you can see we get a bipolar signal, right? It will start from 0, it will go up, but it will also go down below 0, so we have a bipolar signal. In the case of this VCA, it will only respond to voltages above 0. It will not respond to anything below 0. And its range is from 0 to 10. Right, so what we can do is set the LFO to be unipolar. So it will only oscillate from 0 upward. And this we can do with the offset. You see it says now offset bipolar. If I click it once, it says unipolar. And now it will oscillate from 0 to 10. You can see this also here, minimum and maximum 10, right, 0 to 10 volts. Right, so now the VCA also is opening fully. Now to add a bit more movement to this, we can use the R&D module or the random module to modulate the rate of the LFO, the rate of oscillation. And again, that's basically the frequency. Here we have the FM input. This stands for frequency modulation. So we can use the random module to modulate the frequency and by that the rate of the LFO. Right, and we get something a bit more interesting. I would like this to be a bit slower. Again, we are going for a generative ambient here. So the starting point will be here, and then it will modulate the rate up and down. Okay, so now let's do something like this. Instead of a sine wave, I will disconnect the sine wave. We will add also a filter, the VCV VCF. Right, the voltage controlled filter, and we will send the saw wave through the low pass filter. We have here the LPF, the low pass filter output. Right, and now a low-pass filter will attenuate, it will reduce the level of the higher frequencies and will let the lower frequencies pass unattenuated. And when I say higher and lower, I mean higher and lower from this point, the cutoff point of the filter. If I change it, right, we let more frequencies through, so it's a bit brighter. If I open it fully, we get basically everything. Right, but we can also attenuate the higher frequencies and have something a bit darker. So again, we have more control over the timbre. We have another way of adding movement to the sound. And for this, let's use another LFO. In this case, we will use the sine output. Modulation is green to modulate the cutoff point of the filter. Right, again, let's make this slower and add movement to it with the random module, again, through the frequency modulation or rate modulation. Right, so we have more variation also in timbre. The VCA will open with one LFO in its own rate, and the VCF will open with its own LFO and again in a different rate because we are using two different outputs here from the random module. Each output is unique. Now let's add some effects to this to make this a bit more ambient. We will use two VCV delay modules, and I'm using two because I would like this to be in stereo, right? So we have here left and right, basically. The delay time of the right can be a bit different, right? And what we will do, we will send the VCA to one delay and a copy of it to the second delay. If I hold Control and Shift, I can just grab another cable and send this to the second delay here, right? So we have two copies going to the delays, and then the mix output will go once to the left and once to the right. Add some delay through the mix and add feedback so it's nice and long. And of course, this will not be ambient without reverb. I'm going to use the Galaxy reverb from Sapphire, which is quite nice. So again, we have left and right, and also to the outputs, and then add a bit of mix here. Right, and already just from this relatively simple setup, we get something very beautiful. Lots of movement. I just want to quickly mention that if you want to learn more about modular, if it's in VCV or in hardware, I have multiple courses online about different subjects like starting with modular or digging deeper into VCAs. So again, if you're interested, there's a link in the description to where you can find these courses. Now let's take this random sequence and try to add harmonies to it. And actually, first of all, because we are going to add more voices, we will also need to mix these voices, so I'm going to use the ST mix from Befaco. This is a simple stereo mixer, right? So again, we have the first channel and the output will go back to the main output. Just raise the level here, right? And now we can mix more voices. Of course, you can experiment with other mixers, but for this patch, this is more than enough. And now let's really add or try to add harmony to this. So for this, we will use another module from VCV. This has a long name, but bear with me. It's a sample and hold analog shift register. This module can do many things, but we will use it basically to take snapshots of the random sequence and to sequence additional voices. We will do this again slowly, step by step. So let's first of all add our voices. We will use two wavetable VCOs. I add one, Control D, I can duplicate it. Now in this case, instead of having dedicated wave outputs, right, like we had on the VCO where we had sine, triangle, saw and square, here we have just one output, but we can morph between the shapes, right? So we have a different control over the timbre of this voice. I can also connect this already, right? We have again left and right. This will be also stereo. Right, so we have again a different timbre control. Right, we don't even need to use a filter in this case if we don't want to. We can just morph between the shapes. And again, we will take snapshots of the random sequence, right? So the sequence will be our input in this case. Again, pitch will be yellow from the quantizer, so everything is already set to a scale, right? This will be the input of this module. And we will use two outputs. Let's say for now the first one and the second one. What I want to show you here, you see we have the output and we also have here an arrow on each of the outputs. That means that this output goes also to the input of the second channel, and the second channel goes to the input of the third channel. Basically, this is called normalization. The inputs and outputs are internally connected unless you connect something to them. Because we have nothing connected here, this will be internally routed right from the output back to the input. So no need to connect again the pitch sequence here. And actually there is another interesting thing about this module is that each output is delayed by one trigger. Let me show you this. If I trigger it once, now if you're listening with headphones you can hear this quite clearly. Right, we have the left channel changing pitch. If I trigger it again, now the right channel switched the pitch. Right, basically the right channel will be delayed by one trigger. Right, so if I take even a lower output, let's say something here, for example, output 5, it will be delayed by 5 triggers, right? So we get more, the pitch is more spread in this case. Right, so we have a bit more variation. Now I would like to trigger this slower than the original sequence. So for this we can use a clock divider. This module will basically count a certain number of triggers before it outputs a trigger. So if we use the same square output we used from the LFO, right now the first output here, from the first output we will get every second pulse or every second trigger because it will count 2, right? Then we have here divided by 4, it will count 4, so every fourth, then it will divide it by 8 and so on and so forth, so we can get slower triggers in this case. Let's use the divided by 4, again triggers and gates and clocks are blue, and also here this is also, as you can see here, normal, so we don't have to connect more cables, one is enough. Right, so now we have 2 different notes in addition to the original random sequence. And actually what I would like to do here is I would like to tune them also higher, 1 octave higher. Now by default in VCV-Rack most oscillators are tuned to the note C4. So an octave up will be C5. If I right click the frequency knob and I enter C5, this will automatically tune this an octave up, right? I will do this to the second oscillator, C5, right? So now they play the different octaves from the other oscillator we have already. And also the notes will change slower thanks to the clock divider. And now before we add movement to the timbre here, let's send this already through a nice big reverb. Again with another galaxy, we have left and right. Again a stereo voice, and in this case let's take the size a bit up and the mix all the way up. Again we have ambient generative. Right, and we have a bit of harmony. Now for adding movement, again, let's use a random module. In this case, it will be the VCV random that will look like this. It has multiple, let me just move things here. It has multiple outputs. If we look at the scope, for example, we will use the smooth output here, the last one on the right. Right, and we take the shape all the way up. We get smooth random voltage here. Right, that we can use for all sorts of things. Maybe I will make this even slower, read the rate here. Right, so again we get smooth random signal, and this we can use to modulate the position here, which will basically be the timbre in this case. Right, so this will go to both VCOs, but in one case we will open the attenuverter here all the way to the right, and in the other case all the way to the left. So when one opens, the other one closes, and vice versa. Right, so this will basically modulate them in different directions. And we get a bit more movement. Now what we need is a nice bass drone. For this we can use, for example, 3 VCOs. One, again, Control D to duplicate it, 2, and another one, 3. Now we will need to mix them separately. So we can use another mixer. In this case, I can use the CV mix. Yes, it's called the CV mix, but it will also mix audio. And it has 3 inputs, which is basically all what we need. We will use once a sine wave, once a saw wave, and once a square. Again, just to have something a bit more interesting. This will go through another low-pass filter with the VCV VCF. Again, the low-pass filter output to another channel here. This will be mono in this case. Right, and again we have the sine that in this case we will tune 2 octaves down. So again, by default it's C4, 2 octaves it's C2. Already we have the bass. And then the saw and the square will be 1 octave down. So in this case it will be C3. And we can also detune them a bit. If I hold Control and Shift, I can just move this just slightly, just to add some movement by detuning them. And we can add also movement to the filter with another output of the random module. We can use the linear output. Again, just a random signal. Add some movement to the bass. So we have also a bass drone. And now what I would like you to do is, first of all, try to make this bass sound, this bass drone, a bit more interesting, maybe with more modulation, maybe with more processing. Say you can turn it into something with more movement. You can also try to add another voice to this, maybe something percussive, maybe something more repetitive rather than random. There is even another channel here free on the mixer. And something that can be quite interesting is if you rebuild this with different modules, so different oscillators, different filters, other modules for changing the timbre of the voices. Try using different modulation sources, other notes on the quantizer, see what you get. This is your homework for the first weeks of 2025, or whenever you watch this video. Again, this is a simple patch, but it's quite useful and it's perfect starting point to experiment with. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Cheers.